Hello, and welcome to the final webcast of the year from RMC Brown Limited. My name is Ross Brown, and today I want to give you a super user's view of databases and how you get the most out of them. If you like what you hear today, please like, subscribe, and share. You know the drill. I've spent the last 20 years now working extensively with databases from both the client and the vendor side, and the following talk focuses on what I deem to be the fundamentals of maximizing your investment as a user. It's important to point out that I'm not a programmer or a developer, and I have no intention of straying beyond my field of competence. But we're going to start by looking through some key concepts, which, whilst technical in places, is essential to understanding how things work, but hopefully without too much jargon. Then we're going to consider best practice and finally some additional considerations. So let's get to it. The first thing to understand is that the data we store within a database will conform to a particular type. For example, text, which is just alphanumeric characters, dates, currencies, yeses and nos, and so on. Any rudimentary users of Excel will be somewhat familiar with this structure, but let's look at some examples within the most common database you're likely to use, your phone's address book. When you save a contact in your phone book, you'll have numerous options for them: name, telephone number, date of birth, honorifics, and so on. You wouldn't save a contact's birthday as free text, and you couldn't save their name as a date. So, once you appreciate that data comes in different types and forms, it's then necessary to organise it. This is done using a data table, and it typically takes data sets of a common theme and groups them together in the back end. So, to go back to our example, all of the addresses will be kept together, all of the dates of birth will be kept together, and all of the nicknames are kept together. Now, it's all very well storing things that way in the back end, but it's not very helpful when it comes to the front end. It's necessary to reassemble the data in a way that's intelligible for the end user. To do that, however, we typically don't use the whole record for several reasons. First of all, it's very inefficient given the potential length of the record. When you think about addresses, which may have a county, it may have a country, and it may have a postcode as well. Secondly, some databases will reuse records if they appear multiple times. Consider addresses again. If you have a number of customers at the same address, you don't want to put the same data in again and again. So instead, what we do is to label each entry with a reference code, which is used when we want to access a specific record. And this code is called the primary key. So in this instance here, address 1 is A1, address 2 is A2, and so on. So to present a highly simplified example, here's what a small family contact database might look like. 3 people with different first names but sharing a surname, living across 2 addresses. And that's a database. This is something of a back-end issue, but it's an important one to understand. The data within your database has to live somewhere in order to be saved, manipulated, and retrieved. And usually the options will be on-premise, which means the information is stored on a specific computer or server that is usually controlled by the client or a nominated third party. The other option is cloud-based, which essentially means it's accessible through a website controlled by the vendor. There are pros and cons to both, and not every software vendor will offer both options. Useful as a single database might be, there can be advantages when you link up a series of systems to talk to each other. For instance, a sales team that can keep records of their customer pipeline on a database can feed that information through to a finance system, which saves having to re enter things like a company name and address when it's time to raise an invoice. The invoice information, in turn, will be useful from a project management standpoint, so client budgets can be tracked and managed. Now, this can become very complicated very quickly, and it's therefore imperative to identify the owners of your data, as they will essentially determine what is your golden source or official version of the truth. Most of you will be familiar with the phrase garbage in, garbage out, or a variation of it. And as a rule, the more effort you put into the data integrity of your systems, the more you'll ultimately be able to get out of it. Unreliable data can cause much more of a headache for you than correct but incomplete data. So, getting solid standard operating procedures is a great way to ensure data hygiene remains high and therefore is the greatest value to your business. No video on databases would be complete without a mention of the 2016 General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. Enough ink has been spilled on this subject, so I will leave a link to official guidance in the show notes. But remember, from a UK perspective, that we are still bound by equivalent regulations, even though we have left the EU. So that takes us to the end of today's webcast and the end of the year. If you're not seeing the value from your databases that you'd hoped, please get in touch to arrange a completely free consultation through any of our socials, all at RMC Brown Limited, and link in the show notes below. Otherwise, I wish you all a happy new year and speak to you again in 2026. Goodbye.